I thank the gentleman. The chair will now recognize the ranking member of the Energy, Climate, and Grid Security Subcommittee, someone I look forward to working with in this Congress, Ms. DeJette, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit an article from Energy Wire titled Ukraine War to Accelerate Shift Away from Fossil Fuels.
Without objection.
Thank you. This article reports that BP's own annual energy outlook acknowledges that, quote, the increased importance placed on energy security as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war leads over time to a shift away from fossil fuels toward locally produced non-fossil fuels, accelerating the energy transition, end quote. And so this hearing is about discussing the strength of our economic, environmental, and national security. In other words, it's energy independence. Now, as I mentioned in my opening statement, my colleagues have put forward policies and ideas that suggest that they think energy independence hinges on increased domestic development of oil and gas resources. But as I said, energy independence can only happen with a rapid transition to clean energy. And so, Dr. Unruh Cohen, first of all, I want to thank you for your work on the Select Committee, and I also want to thank my colleague Kathy Castor for her wonderful work on that committee too. In your expert opinion, will increasing oil and gas production help protect the American public from the volatility of the global oil market? And if not, why not?
Increased U.S. production will not necessarily protect American consumers from volatile energy prices, because we're still connected to the international market. And so if something the world away causes production to go out in Saudi Arabia and we have a price spike, then that passes through our entire economy.
Even if the oil and gas is produced here?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, will increasing oil and gas production reduce the cost of extreme weather and climate-related disasters?
It will not.
And will increasing oil and gas production ensure that our economy, the U.S. economy, is thriving?
It will not.
Will increasing oil and gas production mean that the United States no longer imports crude oil from countries like Saudi Arabia?
Most likely not.
Okay, so if increased oil and gas production won't protect consumers for price shocks from the increasing cost of natural disasters, from the boom and bust oil economy, and it won't make us energy independent, what do we need to do, very briefly, to achieve energy independence, and how do we need to get there?
I think our goal should be energy security, which means relying on clean energy produced here in the United States and working with our allies around the world. And there's a whole host of technologies that will help us do that, and we'll see an acceleration in those based on the laws that have recently been signed.
Now, you're not suggesting that tomorrow we would have to stop using oil and gas, but you're saying we would need to have a transition. Is that right?
We need a managed transition. That's what we need for our economy. That's what we need for our energy workers. That's what we need for our communities that depend on energy for their tax base. That's why we had so many things in the Inflation Reduction Act to help those communities and those workers transition.
Great, thank you. And speaking of those communities, Ms. Jackson, I wanted to just talk to you for a minute, because in my congressional district, I have a lot of low-income communities that are also environmentally very vulnerable. And I have a neighborhood, Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, which is just downwind from a gas plant, from a gas refinery. And they have had terrible environmental problems. There's lead in their soil, terrible asthma increases, all kinds of other problems. So I wanted to ask you the question. I know you advocate for low energy costs, and I agree with that, because those people have a hard time paying for their energy in the winter. I agree with that. But wouldn't you love to see an economy where we could both reduce those environmental impacts on low-income communities and also have low energy prices? That would be a yes or no answer.
That would be yes with stipulations.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I need to apologize to the gentleman from Kentucky for not recognizing him as the chairman of the Health Subcommittee. So welcome to that, and good luck. I now want to go to the chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dabar, Inflation Reduction Act, we've heard about that. We've heard about trying to, do all this stuff in America. And one of the stipulations in that act when they were doing all the Green New Deal type stuff inside of what was supposed to be the Inflation Reduction Act was that we would do it in America. We're going to do it in the United States. So I've got a couple of questions in that regard, and that is, one, recently the DOE awarded a $200 million grant to battery maker Microvast, even after the company told the Securities and Exchange Commission that they were heavily dependent upon policies made by the Chinese Communist Party's apparatus in China. Do our DOE officials do a decent job of vetting these, or do they just fill them out, and if they've got an address in Texas, that's good enough?
Yes, Congressman, I can't exactly define what DOE did on the Microvast award, but as you correctly said, the company itself told the Securities and Exchange Commission it was a Chinese-controlled entity and that it did not meet American accounting standards, and the Securities and Exchange Commission was looking at delisting them from the United States. Even though technically it was legally incorporated here, the vast majority of the operations were in China by their own admission and with the SEC. It is, I think it was the intent of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act to strengthen American companies and to for those battery technologies, amongst others, get us away from China. And that is a bit of a question on why they decided to see that.
So you would think that was a bad decision by DOE to give them $200 million?
I think that there are plenty of other companies, there are plenty of battery companies, and I'm not certain why awarding it to someone who self-admits that they're a Chinese-controlled entity. There's probably other ones in the United States to support.
Let me ask you about Contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited. Now, this is a Chinese battery manufacturer and also attempting to get both Virginia money and federal money, made a deal with Ford, but in that deal, Ford would own the physical plant, but the Chinese company would have all the technology. They would control all the technology and all the actual manufacturing. Is that really a way to bring American green technology into the forefront, or are all we doing is becoming a colony of China when it comes to battery technology, when we take our taxpayer dollars and give it to the Chinese, even if they have a Ford nameplate on the outside of the factory?
Yes, Congressman. It appears that Ford and the largest Chinese battery manufacturer, the largest one in the world, CATL, decided to structure legally to get around the Inflation Reduction Act American requirements by having Ford front them, but it was really going to be a CATL plant. I applaud the governor of Virginia to turn that down. But whether it's this committee or Ways and Means, I would hope that someone would write a letter to Treasury as they look at writing the tax code underneath the Inflation Reduction Act, and make certain that lawyers, no disrespect to lawyers, I'm a nuclear engineer, don't come up with all these options that legally get around the Treasury rules, but allow Chinese companies to get a greater foothold in the United States. Hopefully that's quite bipartisan.
Well, I hope that will be bipartisan, and I can assure you that we'll continue to do oversight from this committee. Hopefully other committees will do as well. With the remaining time that I have left, I would be remiss if I didn't give Ms. Jackson some time. If you could expound on how late and missed electric bill payments, in light of the fact that the rates are going up for everybody in the country, including poor folks, how the late and missed electric bill payments compound the negativity on families living paycheck to paycheck.
Well, we're not living paycheck to paycheck. We're living paycheck to Wednesday, and then we're borrowing money for people to be able to last us to the end of the week. So the impact is devastating. This is the deal. Here's the situation. We should be making sure, our community shouldn't be an afterthought. And so when you're sitting down there thinking about how you're going to work with energy, we should also be considering the cost.
And the cost for the poor families in particular. Thank you very much. My time's up. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair will now go to Ms. Matsui for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Transportation is one of the most polluting sector of our economy. Emissions from gas and diesel engines are directly responsible for the premature deaths of 17,000 to 20,000 Americans per year. And that doesn't even take into account the much larger impact of vehicle emissions as one of the leading causes of climate change. And that's why I have been a long-standing champion of stronger vehicle emissions rules and stronger fuel economy standards, and why I lead yearly appropriations efforts supporting clean transportation across different agencies. Dr. Unruh Cohen, what are the health benefits of clean transportation, especially with regard to frontline communities?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. The public health benefits of switching to cleaner transportation, transit, other ways to get around the country and our communities is huge. So many communities are impacted by NOx, smog, particulate matters, black carbon that come from both on-road and off-road fuel use, that we can significantly decreasing those leads to immediate health benefits, both for asthma in kids and elderly. I mean, we're even in the point where we've identified some of those pollutants can cross the placental boundary in women. And so, babies still in their mother's womb are being impacted by air pollution.
Okay, thank you. In 2021, I co-led the Medium and Heavy-Duty Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Act, which would fund EV charging equipment for medium and heavy-duty vehicle fleets. This would help state and local governments, municipal service providers, and trucking companies electrify their fleets. The Inflation Reduction Act expands the 30C alternative fuel refueling property tax credit to help governments, businesses, and individuals buy and install EV charging stations. Dr. Unruh Cohen, what will the EV charging infrastructure look like in America in 5 years, given the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Well, as Yogi Berra is said to have said, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But what I'm confident in saying is things will look totally different. The investments from both the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act are really going to mean a huge expansion and improvement in our charging structures across the world, across the country. We're going to see a huge increase in electric school buses, which is going to be incredibly beneficial to the budgets as well as the health of school districts all across the country. I think we'll be in a position where people will feel very comfortable traveling, going on the Great American Road Trip in their electric vehicle.
Okay, thank you. California leads the country in rooftop solar capacity, with more than 8 million California homes benefiting from the cheapest source of energy known to man. I am a strong supporter of rooftop solar and is proud to champion expanding the 25D residential clean energy tax credit in the Inflation Reduction Act. When we talk about grid resilience, it's important to remember that many homes in Florida and Puerto Rico with rooftop solar did not lose power even after they were battered by powerful hurricanes. Dr. Unruh Cohen, what role does rooftop solar have in the clean energy transition, and how can it help make our electric grid more resilient?
Thank you for that really important question. Rooftop solar has incredible benefits, both to save consumers money on their electric bills and build that neighborhood resilience. I think, increasingly we'll see neighborhoods with rooftop solars developing microgrids so that when those, and additional placement of power, of PV and batteries, other things at critical schools, fire stations, those types of places in our communities, so that when disaster does happen, there is still a power source, there is a place where people can come to get electricity and do the things they need in the aftermath of disaster.
Okay, thank you. I'm running out of time, so thank you very much for your testimony. You're back.
I thank the gentlelady, and now I'll go to the subcommittee chair for Innovation, Data, and Commerce, Mr. Bilirakis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Congratulations on your subcommittee chairmanship as well. Since the Biden administration came into office, Americans have been faced with persisting energy crisis. We are in the midst of unprecedented increases in cost of living, and I continue to hear from my constituents on a daily basis regarding how difficult it is to make ends meet. I want to highlight one in particular, if I may. Patricia is an 84-year-old constituent who lives in Hudson, Florida, in Pasco County, with her 62-year-old disabled daughter. They live on an extremely strict fixed income. Their electric bill has gone up an average of $50 per month in the past year, despite the fact that they do not use central heat or air conditioning in their home. And you know what it's like not to have air conditioning, particularly in the state of Florida. So when coupled with other inflationary increases in the price of food and medicine, this mother-daughter senior duel has been pushed to the brink of financial hardship. Sadly, many of my constituents have similar stories to Patricia, and very clearly from Mrs. Jackson's testimony, the most vulnerable Americans are disproportionately affected. The United States needs energy policies that make energy more affordable for Americans, not more expensive. That's the bottom line. Particularly, I want to focus on improving the permitting process for pipelines and expanding pipeline infrastructure. I mentioned that this stat, I mentioned it earlier in the roundtable that we had last week, but according to the American Petroleum Institute, Florida will face a 42% higher market forward prices for natural gas than the average this calendar year. One of the main factors contributing to these higher costs is a lack of adequate pipeline infrastructure. Mr. DeBar, can you please talk a bit about how delays in pipeline permitting, like for the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the canceled Atlantic Coast Pipeline, impact the ability for these projects to be completed or even deter the undertaking of these projects in the first place? And again, what recommendations do you have to help expedite pipeline infrastructure for the American Southeast?
Yes, Congressman. So when a company comes along and wants to build a pipeline or a transmission line, they estimate how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take to start building and how long it's going to take to build. There's two things that have really exploded the challenges around that. One is that the extended approval processes, when people come up with a project cost and the approvals take a very long time, those project costs, because of inflation, become uneconomic. And we're seeing that, for example, in Massachusetts, actually, with offshore wind right now. They proposed a contract. The approvals have taken so long, and then the inflation topic is on top of it. All of a sudden, the offshore wind projects, they withdraw them because they don't make economic sense anymore. So the combination of inflation plus very, very long approval processes are really impeding any sort of construction in this country today.
Thank you. Another question for Mr. DeBar. In addition to addressing the delays on the agency's side, Is there anything we can do in Congress to reduce the delays brought about by the courts?
Congressman, I'm not, never written a law from scratch like everyone here has, but I do think that the Federal Power Act and the Natural Gas Act are not definitive enough to make FERC approve and meet their statutory obligation to deliver energy of any type. Everything is getting held back. So I would recommend that this committee take a look at how to facilitate and maybe things such as time stops, time clocks, that maximum amount of time to review. That's not to say yes or no, it's just put a timeline on so it doesn't take 10 years for a 10-mile road.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.